Hi everyone. My name's Nick Temple. I'm Deputy Chief Exec of Social Enterprise UK. So you're most welcome to the event as a whole, but also this session, which is Goliaths win, Davids lose, which we'll explain in a second. Delighted that I have an esteemed panel to debate this. You don't have to laugh at the word esteemed. I genuinely believe it. That was said with full sincerity. In the order you will hear from them, I've got Yvonne Thomas, who's the MD of Interserve, the justice business within Interserve. So at the moment involved a lot in transforming rehabilitation, but also a background in government, and then before that also with BT in the private sector. Tom Lewis-Rainier, the comms director at Catch-22, who's filling in for his CEO, who unfortunately can't be with us today.
Does that make me esteemed still?
You're still esteemed. You're esteemed by default, I think. So can you be esteemed by default? I think so. We'll go with that. And Tom's particularly involved actually in their social investment and social innovation work. And Alison Reid, who is Chief Exec of Community Dental Services, a great and dynamic social enterprise, one of the few operating in the dental space that spun out of the NHS. And I won't label you as Goliaths or Davids. It might feel a bit personal if I did so, but you could probably gather that there's slightly larger organisations to my left and slightly smaller ones, including me, are over this side. I suppose the idea of this session is to look at whether the Social Value Act and agenda is adding to what might already be skewed in some sort of public sector commissioning. So is it, if we're making requirements of people to measure and report and articulate and communicate their social value, is that even more skewing the playing field in favour of the larger organisations? And if so, are there ways we can tackle that? What can we do about it? So whenever I've chaired a debate previously, it always tends to end in violent agreement. So I hope we might not have that entirely today, but I hope also we do get some actions and some solutions out of it. So I was just going to do a quick show of hands before we kick off. So at the moment, do you think, in terms of social value and public sector commissioning, that Goliaths win? Raise your hand if you think Goliaths wins and Davids lose. Okay. And if you think Davids do all right out of it as well. Okay, quite happy. Good. It's good that you raised your hand, Yvonne. I like that. And can I just ask which of you consider yourself a Goliath in the organisational sense? And a David? Okay, cool. So we've got a sense of who's in the room. So, okay, without further ado, I will shut up. And first up, Yvonne, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. So, being a Goliath, of course, we've got a slideshow. We do that. Okay, so I was quite entertained by the title of this session because the way I look at this, if my religious history serves me right, a young lad with no resources but a lot about him, saw this great big bloke in front of him and thought he's going to be a problem. He nipped round the back of a rock, picked up a free resource called a pebble, used a recycled asset slingshot, very neatly and deftly thought on his feet, took the bloke's eyes straight out, rendering him ineffective or dead. And that's what Davids do to Goliaths if Goliaths underestimate them. So I operate in a world of both large corporates. We are an outsourcer in the justice space where I specialise. We run a fair old chunk of the outsourced probation service. But I also operate in a world where I'm utterly dependent on a group of partners, and I use the word advisedly, not supply chain, but partners, because I can't deliver without them. So I'm not sure who's in charge in that situation, because I'm not sure anyone is. Well, I am a bit sometimes, but not very often. It's not like that. But that's not necessarily typical of what we see in large public sector procurements. So I'm going to put a contention up here that if we look at the social value approach to this, that the very, very best way to get the best social value generated is if people labelled Goliaths, people labelled Davids, and the people who actually really count, who make the decisions, i.e. in my world, the public sector, actually work together to create something different. So I'd just like to sort of give some perspectives on why this doesn't happen in the way we all want it to. Why is it that we just have great big procurements and companies like mine go, oh golly, that was good, we did rather well out of that. Let's go and commission some stuff from the third sector, which is really, how I think it works most of the time. But there are different ways. So let's look at some of the behaviours that we see. Right. The first thing is that I've learned over the last 2 years of trying to put some innovative ways of delivering together, not for its own sake, but because it was clear that the way traditional supply works doesn't actually maximise what can be done. And the first thing that I came across probably 2 to 3 years ago, when I started to try and engage really deeply with particularly the voluntary sector that's very important in making a success of our services, was what was the culture of our organisation, and was it getting in the way with dealing with small voluntary organisations, and actually what was their culture and their appetite to actually deal with us. And it does stand in the way if we sit there and sort of say, actually, you're going to have to take all of these commercial terms and you're going to have to behave like that and you're going to have to sign our 28-page contract and we're not going to pay you for 6 months. Of course, that's not going to work. So Goliaths have to recalibrate their expectations if they want to try and leverage these social values. And we do that. The second thing that stands in the way is commissioning behaviour. Adrian alluded to it for those of you who heard him speak this morning, that if you say, I want to buy something that's that shape, it's got that many people, it's going to do that, and by the way, it's going to do what we do now, but it's going to do it for 20% less, you are not going to get new models of delivery. So it's not as simple as saying to commissioners, give us more money. It's for us to try and work with commissioners to say, well, you can't cash the benefit of this service, but another part of the public sector can. If we can collectively stop people offending, A&E on a Friday night will cost less to run. Simple things. But of course, the public sector can't join up and cash that benefit. Well, that needs to be addressed, and it now needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. I've sat in rooms like this for 10 years, actually hearing that problem articulated and articulating it, and it doesn't seem to be moving. So if these types of events and organisations can help to move that, time well spent. Procurement rules get in the way. The Transforming Rehabilitation competition became famous or infamous for the fact that it was seen as an opportunity for larger third sector organisations, who are Goliaths in their own world, by the way, to actually prime major government outsourcing contracts. Of course, when it came to the end of it, their solutions were great, but they couldn't put up parent company guarantees, they couldn't meet the commercial terms, and that was a bit of an own goal all round, because that was just procurement rules. So if government genuinely wants participation from a wider provider base, then it needs to look at that. Now, I don't particularly want them to look at that, because that would mean that I would have more competition, and I think there are better ways of working together to achieve the same outcomes, but I would say that, wouldn't I? Lack of imagination is a huge barrier. We tend to see what is there rather than saying, well, let's forget that and just do something completely different. So we'll come back to that, and I'm going to whip through a couple more points that I just want you to think about from our perspective. There's a few points up there that you can take away and think about what we could do better. We talked about commissioning behaviour. There is a responsibility on all of us who are providers to actually come up with better solutions for commissioners. If we think we've got all the answers, let's package them up and start to be much more proactive about new structures, new ways of doing business, new ways of contracting, rather than just sitting there and grumbling, which we all do. We all grumble at commissioners a lot. Well, perhaps we should be helping them a bit more. And I would also just like to tell you how things can be different. I'm very fortunate that I work for an organisation that gets social value, gets social outcomes. We can always do more, but we understand not only our responsibilities, but also the assets that are out there in terms of different sorts of organisations, different sorts of people. And over the last few years, we've had a number of initiatives that have actually sort of changed the dynamics of the market a little bit. And I've put 3 examples up here. The first is one of our early joint ventures on a major scale with a charity, was with the Rehab Group, an Irish charity. And a number of our work programmes are actually delivered by a JV called Rehab Job Fit. And I may surprise you when I tell you that we own 49% of it, not 51%. And it works really well. We weren't too hung up about structure. We entered into a contract with the government on an equal footing basis. It can be done. There has to be a will on both sides, but it can be done. The second is Purple Futures, which is the organisation that delivers the probation services, which is a partnership between ourselves, Shelter, P3, who are a sizable charity in a specialised field, and 3SC, who are a not-for-profit, who actually manage and acquire our third sector supply chain for us because they're better at it than we are. Very interesting. That is a £700 million set of contracts, and it's run out of a genuine joint enterprise. And the final one was very briefly referred to this morning. A number of us, including Chris Wright at Catch-22, after the TR competitions failed to deliver a new model with the third sector playing a much more prominent part at the top of a table, a number of us sat down and started thinking about what had interfered with that process. And to cut a long story short, ourselves, Catch-22, a small SME called Club Finance, who are very innovative, and Big Society Capital have got together, and we put in an innovative business idea called Business Impact Challenge. So we have a prototype for a public services laboratory that will not only build capability for the third sector, but will also start to put together some new financial products that the third sector can use in lieu of things like parent company guarantees. Now, when you put the third sector and Goliath together, and you throw some bankers in and some accountants, you get real clarity of vision. That is so.
I took you seriously.
There we go. That is actually what we presented to Big Society Capital. The Public Services Lab is a physical entity. It's a capability building entity, but it's also a market changing concept. We are trying to get the right sign-offs from all the right people to actually get this running up live and real by the end of this year. We want it to look at buying community assets, helping communities to actually take control of their own destinies, helping build consortium that can genuinely bid for the TRs or NHS trusts or whatever, that involve the right people, not just the biggest people. So it's a real set of propositions. It's very, very exciting, and it couldn't happen unless you had a big player, an innovative player with great credibility in the sector, money, hence the bankers, and some clever SME thinking. And that's exactly what that is. So I would contend it doesn't matter whether it's David, it doesn't matter whether it's Goliath. I'd prefer not to end up with a pebble in my eye. I think that is the future. Okay.
Great, thank you, Yvonne. I'm going to flick on. Tom.
Well, yeah, so hello everyone. I thought, so I would sort of talk for 10 minutes on this title, David and Goliath, and large and small. And I think that the title in it, and I'll just say a little bit about Catch-22, and likewise talk about a few of the things that we've been doing that sort of address this large, small, what's happening within public services and how we're getting ready for it, and a bit about what our experience is of that. But I do think that coming out of all of the things that I've heard today is whether it's from large organisations or medium-sized ones or small ones, is that it's kind of like maybe the wrong question, kind of, are you large or are you small, and therefore what can you achieve if you're large? Obviously, size brings certain obvious types of roles that you can play, and smallness brings certain types of, fleet of footedness or whatever, and that kind of goes without saying and is important. But, on reflecting on the title, I can't work out whether, I feel large in this space or whether I kind of feel small, really. And I think that's because we don't really primarily think about what we're going to do as a function of how big we are. We kind of think we think slightly differently about it, I guess. And of course it does come into it at some point. But so just a little bit to explain, Catch-22 is a charity. We call ourselves a social business because about 4 or 5 years ago we kind of realised that operating traditionally like a charity, heavily reliant on voluntary income to cover overheads, and the choppiness of that business model just didn't kind of work for us. It didn't allow us to move into the new markets that we saw opening up, and it didn't allow us to, we thought, to be able to do the stuff that we thought we were really good at doing at scale. And so we started, so we didn't change our organisation in terms of how it's registered, but we started to think about ourselves in terms of being a social business. And a lot of the things that Yvonne's put up there, I think, innovative thinking, being able to have conversations with commissioners to try and open up the way that things have always traditionally done. That's when we started to think about, innovative joint ventures, those sorts of things. How can we leverage other things that we don't have, such as really strong balance sheets, for example, to help us to get seats at tables where we can do what it is that we think we're really good at doing, rather than being obsessed with doing everything. That's when we started thinking about these sorts of things. So, kind of having said that, we've got £60 million of income. Our services are across the country. They're principally local authority commission services, although there's a lot of changing of the way that those are commissioned that we see coming into play over the last year or so. Things like social investment contributing to how that change happens. 4 different operational directorates that we have chosen to address the markets that we think are opening up. So justice, employment services, education and family support are the 4 areas that we work across. And I think in terms of, what binds all of that stuff together at Catch-22 and maintaining a kind of clarity of vision, I suppose, and purpose, is that we believe the outcomes that have been experienced by those delivering public services or by those experiencing the delivery of public services have been too poor for too long, really. And we've been a part of that delivery, and we believe that the current austerity kind of financial position is an opportunity for us to try and rethink the way that some of these things are done. So, and we're starting now to see a lot of opening up and reorganisation in the markets, in some of these markets. So in some it's been happening for a while, education, the academies programme has been out there for a while. In some it's been happening more recently, such as the transforming rehabilitation stuff. And in some markets there's obvious big change coming down the line, so in terms of children's services markets, youth justice as well. And so what we're thinking is, how do we get ready for some of that change? And we welcome the change that's happening, and we feel that we're a part of that. So we've got about 1,000 staff, about 600 volunteers, so we feel that we've got some stature to be able to participate at scale. I think, though, rather than taking a market-focused approach into how we address these these opportunities. So rather than thinking, are we big or are we small, you know, we kind of think, what are the right approaches that need to be made in the delivery of public services, and how do we get more of these approaches to the front line? So those approaches we characterise in three terms, really. One is sort of shamefacedly stolen from Steve Hilton, which is about being more human. So it's about building relationships with service users, getting up closer, coordinating the delivery of services more coherently around and flexibly around the needs of those people that are experiencing the delivery of services, which means reorganising and making more human, if you like, some of the procurement rules. So this is a kind of nod to Yvonne's point about procurement rules, siloed budgets, all of these things that get in the way of introducing a lot of these types of approaches. So that's one, is being more human in terms of how these are delivered. Second one is one that was mentioned this morning, particularly on the BITC section, which is about unlocking capacity. So in communities, there's a lot of capacity at the moment which is unlocked, whether it's through volunteering, whether it's through SMEs, whether it's through groups that are active already in the local community. So what we'd like to participate in is in a breaking down of where the coordination of services are delivered, so that there's more local accountability for some of those services. And then finally, I think different governance structures is an area where we think small organisations can participate more with the credibility and with more input as large organisations. So Purple Futures is a good example of that, where you've got you know, a credible platform for the social sector to be delivering an essential part of a human-facing public services role within. It's not a traditional supply chain, it's a sort of innovative structure whereby that work gets to the market. And Public Services Lab, Yvonne's gone over, is kind of, we think, another iteration of that. So as I said, we're kind of agnostic about, you know, who delivers services, as long as these types of approaches are put behind the delivery of those services. And we're quite, you know, eager to participate with any organisation that's kind of, you know, that's for profit or not for profit, that can help outcomes be improved in public services, really. And there was a couple of examples I was going to talk about, but maybe I'll leave those for the questions thereafter.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, I'm keen we have good time for questions as well. So without further ado, Alison.
Right, thank you. This is not a trick question, but can I ask how many of you are registered with an NHS dentist? Are you going to show of hands? Okay. And how many of you know of or have experience of somebody being referred in, family, friend, to hospital for dentistry? Okay. Right, it's just a smaller number. So we're not quite either of those. That's why I asked. Because community dentistry is where it says we provide a service for children and vulnerable adults and older people that cannot access a high street dentist. We are part of the NHS commissioning and all of the issues regarding commissioning, I echo. But we are, our goal is really to improve oral health. And the media coverage around that has probably highlighted to people that with the sugar challenge, oral health in our society is deteriorating. What's the highest reason for children being admitted to hospital for a general anaesthetic? Extraction of teeth. Now, I don't know, I hope to goodness none of your children have had that experience, but having had to follow many children in to see them having that procedure undertaken, general anaesthetics aren't nice, and they do make them feel really yucky afterwards, but the very fact that they might have big gaps as a result of having to take out the teeth that are rotten purely through the diet that they undertake and the fact that they don't brush their teeth twice a day is quite a sad indictment of society, I think, and it reflects something about the complexity for us about being able to demonstrate our social value. So what I'll aim to do is just give you a little bit of context about what we do, and then some of the challenges we've had in trying to evidence our social value, which were partly due to how we started out. So we were, as Nick referred to, a spin-out at the NHS, so that meant that it was a dental department passionately caring about the care and support it delivers to people in its clinics. and out in the community, in people's own homes, and where people are under in environments such as secure mental health or in prisons, we take our service into those facilities. We work in Bedfordshire and in Suffolk, and then we've got a slightly extended portfolio in Oxfordshire and Leicestershire, delivering oral health promotion and screening children to find out what their dental health is like, which gives us a very good picture of the fact it's getting worse. And it's getting worse in those in the lower socioeconomic groups, and it's a challenge with the debates within local authorities about the investment into fluoridation, which I'm not going to go into. But obviously, the whole context of trying to protect children and give them the best start in life starts with health and well-being, and oral health tends to get siloed. So without being sizist, I think we're big in dental world, tiny, absolutely minuscule in anything to do with health and social care. And yet we have a significant impact on identifying early need, because you tend to go to your dentist whether you're feeling well or not. We can find out things about you before you even know that something's wrong with you. We can detect things through the engagement that we have with people that will highlight other issues that we can support them in being referred to support agencies for help, and that could be around health and well-being, or sadly with some of the very vulnerable groups where there are safeguarding issues. So we've got a very big role in those sorts of environments. Our challenges that were small, and we were beautifully formed, but we didn't really have the capacity to think about how we could demonstrate social value in that social, economic and environmental measure. That hard evidence base was something that they didn't think about at the time they spun out. Everything else was rather messy and busy, and setting up a business from scratch was quite tough enough, and making sure that we'd got the right database to prove that we were treating the patients that we meant to treat and that we were getting the outcomes that were important for them was our priority. And then somebody asked us 2 years down the line, well, what's the social impact of your business? And we had these amazing stories, but we didn't have quantitative, demonstrable evidence.
I like the way you did that.
Yeah,
That's good. Yeah.
And so then I began to think, well, we better get some. We better be able to demonstrate, because we're really important. And this is something I don't want to lose, is the message about how a passionate group of people who care so deeply about what they do, that they'll do an awful lot of things that are commissioned and an awful lot that aren't. So we provide services in the evenings and weekends through our mobile service to support the homeless shelters. Our staff work abroad to give free dental services. We're working with some of the refugees and asylum seekers because we care about the fact that they don't have access to dentistry. That might sound weird, but because of the lifestyles of some people and the fact that they move, they sometimes can't get access into the system to be able to have the treatment that they need. So we're there to try and mop that up. It's also a bit of a vagary of the system that if you don't have a registered address, you are not eligible to free NHS care. So we have a bad debt that I effectively measure as social value, which is those that can't pay for their services. So we have
I'm only laughing. That's not a key message to take away.
No.
Bad debt equals social value. No, I like it though. It's good. I can see people tweeting. Yeah, that's fine.
But that's a really good point, because then I think the challenge for us is what do you term it? How do you capture it? How do you translate it? Is everything that's in there translatable into evidence? And that needs time and resources, and that's the one challenge we have. So then when it comes to the larger commissioning modelling that's going on at the moment, I suppose our challenge has been to think about how do we demonstrate that we're the right person for a partner. And I think because of the unique skill set we've got and the fact that we're very specialised, we've got a long experience in dealing with these people in a very committed manner, that's almost a given that we're the right people. But of course we only go in with the best, the prime vendor that's maybe considered the best in class, but then they may not get the contract. And then what happens to our little bit of service where people have really got good relationships, connections are being made well, we get thrown out because we're not the partner of the one that won the contract. So there's some real disconnects for me about what makes for really good service offer when you may be selected to be part of that prime vendor bubble, or you may not. And it's all in the lap of the gods. And, you know, because whether you've chosen the right person to pitch with, bluntly, and that doesn't feel right. And it certainly hasn't felt right with the prison contracts that have been let recently. And I thought I'd keep a theme.
No, that's good.
But the other side of it is I think there's an opportunity to think about how we can convert our stories, how we convert the real anecdotal evidence that we get that is really powerful, because it's the changes that people describe in their lives. We have 80% plus of the people that go into our community oral health programmes saying they've changed the way they do things. And I, as Nick will vouch, will always try and give a public health message at this point, and probably not a great one, but please spit, don't rinse, because it keeps the toothpaste in your mouth, and the fluoride in it is what will help keep your teeth healthy. That apparently is a completely different message to the one that most people can recall, but that's the one to take away with you.
You can
today.
take away that one. That's fine. That's all right. Yeah.
That's the same takeaway.
That's okay.
But the other one, I think, is the fact that just trying to encourage, we hear a lot about choice, and we hear an awful lot about enabling people free choice. A lot of you will be in caring environments where you want to encourage choice, and diet is part of encouraging choice. We would say encourage sugary choices around meal times, please, because it does have a massive impact on the oral health of people. So in going forward, I suppose for us, and thinking about how we can demonstrate social value, I believe that we've got an awful lot that can demonstrate social value in the way that we do things. The biggest challenge for us is what are the social value indicators that will make sense and be able to convert into something that almost is hard cashable for the commissioner. In using some of the tools that we've used, we can do that, but there's always the confounding factors for us that do impact, because it's not only the dental service that's delivered that will result in a reduction in the number of general anaesthetics that a child is exposed to. It's about the social construct and the environment that they're in. There's the support around children's centres. It's the education in the schools. So it's a very multifaceted remit. We try to reach out as much as we can. We aren't big enough to do that on our own. We think it's important that we carry everybody with us, which is always a great opportunity. So sorry for taking it. That's my story.
Great. Thank you very much, Alison. So I think you've heard, you know, some opportunities, some interesting new models that are coming forward. How do Goliaths and Davids work better together in different configurations? And there's a bit of a challenge from everyone to the commissioners. Commissioners in the room are talking, but equally about helping them to get there. And how do we package that or work in a different way that makes it easier for them? And also about this thing about evidencing and that being used, again, the split across departments and so on and so on. So lots to tackle. I have lots of questions, but I'm assuming that we should use the remaining time for your questions. So if anyone has got one, yeah, start with you.
My name is Yusaba. I'm from a company called Femora, and we're a small deaf-led social enterprise. We've been running for about 7 years. Alison, your information there was very informative, and you were saying that dental health is important for health and well-being for the community, and that's sort of given me something to think about. You were saying about people living in the lower incomes, not having the opportunity to access dentists, etc. And you obviously haven't got the capacity to do what you want to do and make the achievements. But is it a lot more difficult to get in partnerships? Have you found that difficult to get in partnerships with other organisations who kind of have the similar ethos as you? Because I know you can only offer a certain amount of dentistry for a certain amount of time, and can you not get funding or something from other businesses so you can really set that project up?
Good. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. 2 points there. One is, you're quite right, I think what we're required to do is to meet the highest needs. So some of that will be that we will support people with very complex learning needs or with very high dental phobia, severe dental phobia, and we'll provide that service on a continual basis. But there is episodic care, which is for those that we can support through providing a more specialist element of dentistry, get them what we call dentally fit, and then they're discharged back to their high street dentist. The challenge is there enough money to do all the things we'd like to do? No. But what we are recognising is that as a business that can trade as well as provide what we're commissioned to do, is that we can potentially grow our business. Our difficulty is then to make sure we get the right person that understands the social ethos of how we're established, works with the same value base, but has a commercial edge to help us make sure our trading element is offering the same level of choice for the clients we wish to serve, rather than trying to compete with a high street dental provider. Do we get to know everybody that's in that space that we could partner with? No. I think the challenge is that we try to network and we try to engage with as many people as possible, but often it's about that serendipitous opportunity coming where we just happen to meet somebody that make connection with.
And not having the capacity to get around everyone and do all that networking. Right, more hands, please. I'll take news. I'll go here first, and then here, and then here. Yeah.
I want to not so much ask a question, but pick up a point that was made, both by Yvonne and Tom mentioned it as well, in terms of procurement rules. I'm a procurement officer.
Welcome.
And I think it's worthwhile making a distinction between rules imposed by law and things which have just arisen out of practice. Because it is true that there is a lot of both EU and UK legislation which is the law and must be obeyed and which restricts the procurement process, and in some cases is deliberately intended. The intention of the legislator was to limit my discretion as a procurement officer. However, there are also procurement rules, in scare quotes, which have actually simply arisen. They've just become practice. It's the traditional way of doing things, but actually it's not something the law says you must or you may not. It's kind of, well, this is the way it's always been done. And in the practice of many public bodies, local councils like mine, there's a certain element by which procurement professionals behave as though those two things are the same thing. So the things which are just established practice is treated as to be set in stone in exactly the same way as the law, and I think there needs to be that needs to be something the procurement professionals, the commissioners, are aware of. And I want to make one particular example of that if I've got time.
You could be quick if you're quick.
Financial checks. So a lot of procuring bodies carry out a financial check in pretty much every tendering exercise they put out, as though that's a requirement, as though the law says you must assess the financial standing of bidders. There's nothing in the law that says that whatsoever. There are laws about how you can do it if you think you need to, but there's no law saying that when you carry out a public tender process, you must assess the finances.
Great.
We carry out a proper financial check in about 10% of our tenders, and 90% with no financial checks whatsoever, because in many cases they're not justified and they're just a barrier to small business.
Thank you very much, Jamie. She's getting look at that procurement applause, which is great. And Jamie's from Durham County Council, though, one of the nominees in the Social Value Awards later. You probably gather why. I was just going to add one brief thing, and then just to say, I suppose, there's a legal clinic this afternoon which is exactly looking at what's permitted, and particularly looking at the permission and opportunity you have actually amongst the rules and the actual rules. So, sorry, Tom, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I think quite often what's used as a bit of a conversation point in roundtables and sessions and stuff is commissioning on the one hand and procurement on the other hand, or in the same hand, or whatever. But the two are different exercises, and I think that kind of where the starting point should be, in my view, is commissioning and what it is that you're procuring and how you design what that service is, or that configuration of resources, or what the outcomes are. And people talk about working backwards from the outcomes. And I think that's the kind of thing that, for me, procurement rules, kind of is largely about the commissioning environment as well, and how those things are designed. What it is that's procured.
Tim? And then John.
Tim from Interserve. Just a quick one. I'd welcome the opinions of the panel on not rules and regulations, but prejudices and perceptions. Big, competent, greedy, uncaring, small, lovely, but useless.
He really looked at us when he said that, didn't he? It was like brutal.
And the other prejudice, you can't have, you've got to do one or the other.
Sure.
There's a choice.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
clearly, we don't believe any of that stuff. We believe
I'm
it's a
glad.
false choice.
Yeah.
But what can we all collectively do to debunk those prejudices?
Good. Yeah. Okay. That's a good challenge. Do you want to go for that first, and then I'll come back to you?
So I think it's quite interesting, this whole perception thing, isn't it? If I had a penny for every time I'm asked, is it right to make profits from prisoners and offenders, I would be an extremely rich person, even richer than the fat cat I'm supposed to be, right? The simple fact is that these are the wrong perceptions. Are we good at what we do? Are we well motivated? Do we have the right partners? If commissioners ask those questions and we ask them of each other, we'll end up with very functional public service delivery arrangements. I have found some perfect, very small voluntary sector organisations, I mean, like with 3 or 4 people in them, and 2 of those will be volunteers, who deliver a quality of service I can only dream of at a cost that's fantastic. So small can be perfect, large can be useless. The only difference is if small is useless, it's only a small amount of uselessness. If you get large and useless, it's dangerous.
I like. That's something.
Large and useless is very bad.
Something to remember there, right? Okay, Alison, any thoughts on those prejudices? Like, I know how good your organisation is, so but do you run into that? Like, you deal with some big organisations as well. Do they come armed with a prejudice about how you are and who you are? Do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think because of the fact that we've got a specialism, it's a slightly different position because we come from a position of really understanding the legislation. Unfortunately, I always dislike intensely any professional group that says, oh, we're different. But the way in which dental services have been treated and the law has established around the dental contract and the Dental Act has enabled them to get away with saying that because there's legislation that backs that up. So in many respects, we come to the table as equal partners, one, because we've got the expertise and knowledge and the really deep understanding of how that could work differently, with the opportunity to work with somebody that can understand how to work at scale, how we could work differently, what the systems are that we could use that could help us to do things in a much more slick and effective way. So I think there's really great opportunities to work together. And I'm not sure, having come from a commissioning background, I'm not sure that the commissioner itself is looking at that saying that's really bad and evil. I think it's how we have to write the responses sometimes don't always help us to be able to present the picture in the way that we'd like.
Tom, anything?
Well, I think,
to add?
we obviously there is prejudice, and there are preconceived ideas about who organisations are and what they therefore can do, and I guess, I feel like I'm on the receiving end of that. So one example is when we get corporate interest, they kind of see us as a charity and therefore have got this idea about how we're going to participate. But on the other hand, I'm kind of acutely aware that we're seen as large, and so to a lot of the voluntary sector, probably somebody who is more profit driven than otherwise. So, and I think, it's just like you've just got to get over that, and you've just got to know what you're good at doing and then drive that home incessantly, drive a culture across the business so that everybody knows what that is. And then it doesn't really matter whether you're doing this particular type of role or that type of role, as long as you know why you're in it, the value that you're bringing. I think you can overcome, and you also get over a lot of that stuff, prejudices about who are we, who do we need to be, how do people see us? You just get on with doing stuff, and then it becomes easier to work with people, I think, and to sort of test things out and be a bit innovative, I guess. And I think that everybody, you know, so I've got this kind of view about what public service delivery might look like in 2020 or whatever. And I think it's going to be lots of different types of stakeholders rethinking the role that they play within it. So I'm not going to, you know, kind of paint the picture of a theoretical kind of future. Again, the public services lab is a bit where that's being played out. But I was sitting...
It's the start of the thinking.
It's not a simple answer.
But I think I was sitting at, just to give a quick example, I was sitting at a big corporate social responsibility kind of conference a few days ago. And they're basically, what all the companies were talking about was how they were trying to get kids into work or, you know, solve some social problem. And somebody talked about the welfare state and public service delivery. And it's basically the same thing to me, but companies don't see that, on the whole, largely don't see that that's what they're doing, is achieving some form of social service delivery. You know, they kind of see it within their own terms as their own. So I wouldn't put Interserve, certainly on this platform, in that kind of agenda. And I think that's what's, when you bake it into your business as your social responsibility, it's a different thing. But I think, again, companies have to a place to rethink you know, kind of how they operate.
Right, I'm going to take 3 questions because we've got lots. Oh, sorry. So John, and then Mark, and then Louise, and then I will come back for another 3. So let's take the questions first. Yeah, John, go for it.
So I'm John Hitchin, I'm Deputy Chief Exec of Social Enterprise called Renacy. We do delivery of services, but we also do research and consultancy. To try and help Nick out to prevent everyone from agreeing with each other too much.
Thanks, John. Go for it.
I'm just wondering whether the way in which you've all articulated this debate in different ways, it's moved in different ways, is it's actually quite a relative concept. So sometimes you feel like you're David and sometimes you feel like you're Goliath, rather than a binary or a fixed concept. But also, in whatever relationship that is, the person that feels like they're David does have less power than the first person that feels like they're Goliath. And the way in which you, particularly Alison, articulated some of the challenges that you have, that you pick the contractor that you think is the best in class, and you can then end up losing all your work, I suppose, and not getting that contract. And I just wonder whether those of you who are, now I know that the Goliaths lose too, but at the same time, they have a bigger scale to absorb some of that. So a lot of the kind of small organisations that I know, we're quite small compared to some of you at this, but we're also bigger than some of the organisations we work with, who are very small grassroots community organisations. We can bust them if we get it wrong. And I just wonder whether more needs to be done to appreciate that power dynamic.
Great.
Across the organization.
Fantastic, thank you. So a question about the power dynamic, which I think we'll definitely come back to. Mark,
My point's slightly different to that, and that's there's kind of this perception, because we're a large charity, I'm not sort of P3, we're large now, but we want small. And so there has to be, and within our growth, we think we've managed to retain our values and what we set out to do. So there has to be an understanding, I think, from the wider sector that just because you actually do achieve your aims and become a larger provider, which is what everyone in this room is aspiring to do, I think, to deliver on your social mission, doesn't mean somehow you've sold yourself out along the way and we're going to stitch everyone else up. Because one of the things that we do as an organisation, when we're building supply chains to deliver, is we do things like we offer a parent company guarantee to the third sector providers, to all third sector providers, and we deal with all the management infrastructure to smaller third sector providers. So you kind of have to live your values, and I think that's definitely been a lesson for us. There are lots of things we can learn from people like Yvonne and their business, but we must never stop remembering where we came from, because we were all once small, raising all these questions, saying how do we get big, and when we get there we don't sell ourselves down the river.
great, thank you, Mark. It's an excellent point. Louise.
So I have a question around, Louise from the Cabinet Office, look at the role of kind of voluntary sector and social enterprise and public services. And I'm really interested in this, all the conversation, but in particular this idea of kind of winners and losers. And I think there's a perception among kind of charities and potentially some like social enterprises that they have lost if they aren't the ones who sign the contract. So their role in, so contracts should be smaller, we should be able to kind of bid at the top table and all that kind of thing, which there's valid reasons why that position is made. But I just wonder, is that actually success? Do you have to be at the top tip, signing the contract to be the winner? And if it isn't, then how commissioners can incentivise good supply chain management, or more interestingly partnership when they're doing the
Great, so there's the power dynamic, which is not unconnected to the other 2 points, obviously, and very connected to that question about contracting and how you might cascade stuff down as well. Any reflection? Who wants to go first?
It's a
Yvonne,
really
and then I'll
interesting
come to
question
yours.
because it's always easy to say, you know, we can all work in partnership and it will all be lovely and cosy, but to have the vision and the ability to deliver that vision in the way that it was conceived tends to be the responsibility and privilege of the organisation that signs the contract, actually. So I think there is a point around this that if you don't get to sign the contract, even if you're quite a big part of the delivery, it is different. Now, with that privilege comes some massive responsibilities and liabilities. Fine, let's just accept that. But I think some of the things that both we and some other larger organisations have done over the last years, we're starting to look at the structural ways of addressing those. They're not inequities of reward. They're actually, it's how do you get the best vision and then the best forum to implement against it with truly equal voices. Now, at the moment, I would say we're probably a little more equal than the others in our partnerships, to be honest. But it's you have to have very strong partners who are very loud. And given that we've got Catch and P3, you can see the issues that we have. But that actually helps us. The dynamics of that have to be very, very robust in order for it to work. So I think there's a certain amount you can do with structure. I think the PSL model is very different and will take us somewhere else if we can get that going. The early iterations, which was our rehab job fit model, that's worked well. Purple Futures went somewhere different. That's a different concept again. And I think now we've got 60 charities delivering for us collectively. We've got about 200 people delivering services into that. We're spending in excess of 10 million with the third sector through that vehicle every year.
Just also mentioned that the grants programme within that, it's kind of using back to the limit of values, where one of the things we suggested on the way in was not having a price-driven commissioning process, is what we all dream of. And Interserve delivered on that promise and not involved in granting. So it's those kind of things that I think that really do make we live our values, and if you like,
So
Interserve start to live.
So
go on.
you do have to change if you're going to take responsibility for trying to deliver public services in a different way. You do have to change your organisational sort of thinking somewhat. So it would be very, very easy for us to say, well, actually, we're going to pay everybody 60 days in a year. We don't care whether you're a charity or an SME or whatever. We most certainly won't give grants. We give donations. We don't do grants, and we'll do a little bit of that. But no, that is not what we did, because that's not how our partner sector knows how to operate. So we moderated how we want to do this to suit our provider base, because why wouldn't you? Makes sense. Doesn't cost any more either.
So, Alison, anything on that? So, like, there was a couple of bits to that. There was the power dynamic, and there was also the kind of could those designing and developing the contracts help achieve, I suppose, better power dynamics, or more equal, or a sense of social value cascading down? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I would absolutely echo Yvonne's point that I do think if you're not involved in signing the contract, you do feel like you've lost something. And there is always the risk, as there has been, where you lose an element of the business purely because you can't be in that. You haven't got a dialogue that allows you to even engage with anybody else. I think that then leads us into, well, can you adapt quickly enough to stop yourself from dying? So, as you say, going bust. So there's really that thing about, for all of us, is to be constantly thinking about what's the implication of going into this, because if I lose it, what's going to happen next? Then the question about, well, is the commissioning framework right? I think there's some really big challenge about whether it is or isn't, because for smaller providers, there's a question about, well, why can't we go in separately, but then work with whomever, rather than do it the other way around. So we are given equal right in that commissioning to be able to present ourselves as the best for that element. But our commitment will be to how we will work in partnership. So because at the moment it's about who you picture, who you chuck your hat in with. I think that there's really is a question about whether for smaller providers we should be able to have an equal voice, and it's impossible to have it in the way it's set up at the moment.
Okay, Tom, briefly, I'm keen to get another round of questions in.
Well, I think if you want it really briefly, I think it boils down again to sort of knowing what you're good at doing, I think, you know. So we understand where we're playing a role within the supply chain, and I think Yvonne said something which I'd written down sort of last night when thinking about this, which is about being a good partner, you know, and having that trust in the supply chain that you're in, whatever sort of role you play within that is really, really important, and standing behind that, you know. So we're operating within various transforming rehabilitation supply chains. We bid as a prime, we didn't win. It was a painful experience. We had to pick ourselves up and dust ourselves down, which we did vigorously for about 20 minutes. And then we kind of, it's easy for me to say this because we're kind of big enough to be able to reorientate ourselves, but we then reorientate ourselves to supply chains within that. So, you know, and again, it's just knowing what you're good at doing and how you're bringing the value to whatever the structure is that you're operating within.
Some final questions, so we're going to need short questions and equally short answers. Yes?
Just to build on what we said before about power dynamics, and I've worked in supported housing for a while now. Sorry, Adam Brooks from South West London last year. And the trend has been, you know, for decades now, for smaller local organisations to become larger by merging with neighbours and so on and so forth. So, you know, that there is, that's right at times. You know, sometimes localism can mean unaccountability. Sorry, small local organisations can be open to fraud, lack of accountability, and so on. But what I see is happening is that with agendas like regionalism. So talk of power dynamics, regionalism setting procurement agendas, meaning that organisations, there's a lack of choice comes into play. Organisations have to merge or be consumed by larger Goliaths, if you like.
Okay.
And the other issue is that, if I understand the substance of this workshop right, is that lean times mean that unleash creativity, small organisations come together, new ideas, partners who have never before become partners, will have better outcomes. That's fantastic. My anxiety is that that can't keep up with the dismantling of the infrastructure that was there before, the funding being turned off to local authorities, massive taking down of infrastructure. Now, rightly or wrongly, I'm not saying that infrastructure is all right, that it was, you know, perfect, but my anxiety is it's not going to keep up with that. And so, personally, I can't class austerity yet as an opportunity. To me, I see it as too much of a threat to the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. There's some stuff in there about, certainly about the devolution, regionalism, and some stuff going up in scale. I'd like to come back. Tom, I'd love your view on the sort of big organisation taking over a smaller organisation, if I can, just because you've done that relatively recently. Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Possibly. And Colin, quick question.
Yeah, very good. My name is Colin Downey. I'm the sales director in the Wildhearts Group. So we're a social enterprise, and we sell stuff, and business development is a big part of my day-to-day communications with big companies. So we're relative, David, and sort of in the Goliath sphere, but we're very capable of winning those businesses. But I'm perpetually frustrated at lack of social enterprise targets for procurement professionals. So you've got carbon reduction targets, you've got SME targets, you've got all sorts of other savings targets, yet at the end of it, when we show we're commercial and we're competitive with the right quality, that lack of target doesn't help us. So I wonder why so many large-scale corporate businesses who sponsor lots of social value things, who are very keen to drive social value in their regional places, don't have social enterprise or value targets for the procurement professionals. Some comments on that.
Thanks, Colin. And I didn't plant that question. So there's something about, there was a question I think about big and small and the changing environment. I take what the views on austerity, that'd be interesting, and also that kind of, actually, it's not just about the commissioning and the the contracts that are going out. It's about your core business. So briefly, if you could, who wants to start? I don't mind. Tom, do you want to start?
The thing that you were referring to then, Nick, I think, is that at the end of last year, Catch-22 acquired, or I'm not quite sure what that means in this context, but acquired another charity called Only Connect, which was a small, sort of couple of £1 million criminal justice charity. The reason we took them on, if you like, is because on the one hand, they needed some financial support, otherwise they would have gone out of business. They were running according to this sort of traditional charity model where they were dependent on voluntary income, not much sort of fee for service payment coming in. On the other hand, had some fantastic service delivery, had some good service footprints in areas that we wanted to be in, had some great networks in terms of government in particular, and some really, really strong ideas that kind of tallied a lot with ours. And so we brought them in, but we haven't absorbed them as such. They've retained their own identity, they've retained their own board of trustees, their sort of senior management. We've sorted out some of the financial stuff. But the important thing is that we've brought our own platform to bear for them, really, to exploit what they're really good at so that they can potentially grow within what we're offering. So it's our, finances and HR, all of that infrastructure, our relationships that we've got as well. And the idea being that the combination of the two can lead to stronger results, really, and that we wouldn't have been able to do that if we'd have just brought them in and absorbed them all across the...
I primed it just because I think it's hugely important, and within our sector I think there's still, we could do a lot more between the bigger and smaller, and I think it's a really interesting model and approach. Alison, any thoughts on either of the two things you have?
Well, I think on the question about whether you work with other partners, I mean, we're very keen that if community dental services in other areas are being put out to tender, that we work with them. And we may work with them directly, or we may work with them in terms of sharing our experience and making sure that they, if they want to go on their own, that they're in the best position to do so. But obviously we would also offer to be a lead partner, but we want to do that under a shared leadership model so that they still have responsibility and accountability for delivering the service because they know their local needs best. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I think there are some efficiencies at that as you go to scale, which we're not really fully realising yet. The other question about, well, do you have social value as part of what you think is important for yourself? I think I think we've got lots of things that we do that we would say demonstrate that social value, but we've found real difficulty in finding how to measure it most effectively. Okay. And without piling on yet another toolkit or yet another data set on top of what is very much quite an onerous reporting mechanism anyway, because of what we have to do.
Okay, thank you. Final thoughts? Yeah, final point.
I think the measuring the social value thing, I think it's a really good challenge that not only should we be looking for commissioners to ask us to demonstrate more social value, but we should, as large companies who buy a lot of things, obviously we have a good position that we can start to ask our supply chain to demonstrate social value and flow the whole thing up. And I think we do that in Interserve. We can do a lot more. So, for example, we're starting to ask our providers in justice, how many offenders are you going to employ? Yeah, it's just simple stuff, but it makes a difference when you really sort of when you really expand it. But I think that the whole sort of generating social value and making communities better places, large companies who step up to their responsibilities, as we try to. You have to remember, I've got 50,000 colleagues in the UK, and they don't live in Interserve. They live in Bolton and Newham, and they are the community. So we're not this big amorphous thing. We've got colleagues who willingly give up their time to volunteer for organisations in this room. We are part of the fabric. I think that leveraging your point, we need to constantly test ourselves and ask ourselves, are we doing everything that we can to use that privileged position and use that scale to flow that value into the communities that we exist to serve? So a great question, and one that I know Tim will take away and reflect on.
Wow. On that bombshell.
question.
Look, thank you very much. Like I anticipated that we wouldn't necessarily crack this in an hour. What I have learned is that I phrased the question entirely wrong. But, if I'd said Goliaths and Davids probably get on and could find new ways to work together, it wouldn't have been nearly so enticing for you. So, look, can you join me in thanking Tom, Yvonne and Alison for their contributions? And I think there's a number of the other sessions that pick up aspects of what we've discussed, so do kind of delve deeper into those this afternoon. Lunch is back where you had coffee and exhibition, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Good, thank you.